My name's Steve, and I love people who make things. We're a nation of inventive, inspiring makers.
This room alone will produce 100,000 items a year. But yeah, it used to be full of cows.
And then I'd be, Afghanistan or Iraq, sat in my room just sketching out designs, waiting to come home to play around with them.
I'm on a mission to list the greatest products we make, because if we don't champion the skills on our doorstep, we risk losing them.
And running down to our left, we have hand cutting. The problem is getting labour now.
One of the biggest challenges we have here is our ageing workforce.
Join me as we hear stories from behind the factory doors.
I remember drawing my dad's house and he said, "Why don't you count the bricks?"
Oh, he wanted you to be quiet, didn't he? Do you ever have any sleepless nights, Alex?
I don't sleep.
Together, let's make more makers. Welcome to a bonus episode of The Factory Next Door, and welcome to my local train station. We are just waiting to catch the 1724 train into London Waterloo. We'll actually be getting off at Vauxhall because we're going to meet the journalist and broadcaster Evan Davis. Okay, we're on our way. Now, I've known Evan for a couple of decades, actually. I had the privilege of working with him when I was the economics producer at the BBC, and he was the economics editor. And some of you may remember in 2011, he did a documentary series and wrote a book called Made in Britain. And that's just one of the many reasons why I think it'd be great for you and I to sit down and have a little chat with him. Okay, so we're sat on a concrete block in an old car park.
We are.
And around us are loads of factories. This one here, do you know this is the old Royal Dalton factory?
Okay, I didn't know that. This is actually my neighbourhood too, or near my neighbourhood. So this is, I should know. That's
the only thing I've taught you in 20 years, that is. So that's called China Works. That was Royal Dalton's headquarters. And actually on the other side, which is much more glamorous, it's still got Dalton printed over the top.
Okay.
But there's lots of old factories around here, which
we're
I
sitting
know
in front of a place called The Workshop, which looks like it's seen better times. In fact, I think a lot of windows are broken, it's boarded over. I don't know what that would have been, but it's pretty significant space.
That definitely has vibes of an old factory as well, doesn't it? Even down to these big wooden doors.
Interesting, they clustered. This is on the south side of the River Thames. Obviously, south side has often been, I think, slightly lower esteem status compared to the north side.
But you've moved in.
You've
moved in, and
you get so much more.
Risen significantly.
So much more for your money, and maybe that is still a hangover from its economic purpose in the past. But no, it actually, of course, these old buildings, whether they're mills, factories, warehouses, make the best places for modern housing.
They've got
cool
character,
modern housing.
haven't they? The Royal Dalton one, this has been turned into, a nice, cool, trendy co-working kind of.
Transition from manufacturing probably to something a bit more white collar or black collar designy kind of folks sitting in there.
What's the black collar?
I think black collar's the blue collar sort of production, white collar the kind of officey bits, and then the black collar's the cool design folks who
like you and I,
who are in the design economy, who don't obviously never wear a tie and never don an overall,
I haven't heard that. I didn't realise we were spreading out into different colours.
No, I believe so, yeah.
I love that. Okay, so obviously I've come and pestered you because I want your help, basically. I am looking for some economic rigour to kind of back up the kind of the mission and the argument that I'm putting forward in The Factory Next Door. And that argument is essentially that it is important for any economy to have a strong domestic manufacturing sector.
How long have we got? There's so much to say about this. Broadly speaking, I do agree with you. I think there are good economic arguments for manufacturing. I mean, let me give the let me give the opposite point of view. Let's go on a journey where we sort of start with why anyone might think it doesn't matter, and then wander back to actually why it does matter. I think that's the best route to take.
I hope we don't go circular here.
We don't
go back to the
go
start.
I mean, so look, what happened in the world that made manufacturing less attractive as a business to be in was that it turns out that it was quite a good sector for entry-level economies to move into very rapidly and to specialize in. And these entry-level economies, and I'm really talking about Asian miracle economies, firstly Japan, post-war, then you have the others, the Koreas and the Taiwans and Hong Kong, and then you have China, which is just way bigger than the others. All these economies discovered, we can create workshops and factories, we can produce stuff, and we can do it cheaply, because we're not very rich, so we're not expecting to pay ourselves very much. We can do it very cheaply, and we probably can't do it quite as well as the Americans and Europeans, but boy, we're so much cheaper. It's just much better to do it here than it is to do it in those places. So really, what happened in the world was everybody discovered manufacturing was the route to riches. And that makes it very hard for rich countries that want to do manufacturing, because you've got someone over there 20 times your size who will do it much, much more cheaply. So how do you ever justify building a factory in a place where wage costs are high? That is the essence of the argument. And, you know, back in the Thatcher period, there were quite a few intellectuals, some of them still around, people like Patrick Minford, you know, the great economic, one of the influences on Margaret Thatcher, who's very relaxed really about saying, look, if the Chinese want to make your cars and they can do it more cheaply, let them make the cars. There's no point in keeping it. So I think that was a really big argument in allowing deindustrialization. And of course the British led the world in industrialization. They were big world leaders in deindustrializing as well and letting the factories close and causing a lot of disruption to communities and a lot of pain in that process. The company became a kind of dismantled entity in which you had a kind of a person sitting in an office with just managing a whole nexus of contracts for the manufacture, maybe the design. You could just, everything had just been subcontracted. So you had the container ships, you had subcontracting, which meant you'd think about going elsewhere to get your product made. You had China rising, and it all added up to, why would we want to make a T-shirt? Why would you do that?
And you were never going to be able to stop that flow. That was always going to happen.
I agree.
But I think there's a sense now that there were consequences that you couldn't have seen by so embracing the deindustrialization.
Well, look, we were relying on some other sectors to pay our way in the world, and the sectors we relied on were predominantly service sectors, and we're obviously, as a nation, very good at some of them. So we're the second biggest service exporter in the world after the United States. And we're talking services like financial services, so our financial centre, but it's a lot more than that. It can be a lot of design services, architects, practices, civil engineering companies going abroad and managing legal services, English courts. A lot of that is really, really lucrative, you know. Now, it turned out financial services wasn't as lucrative as people in financial services thought. So they were really getting carried away. And in 2007-8, I think we discovered some of the profit was illusory. That was just lucky streak on a set of risks that had been taken that ultimately turned very bad. So that was nothing like as, I think, properly profitable as we had thought. And if you are interested in paying your way in the world, I do think you need a manufacturing sector. You can try and do it all through services, but I'm not sure that really works. And we didn't succeed in doing it all in services. We had to keep it.
So I'm going to give you a quote from your book.
You're going to give me a quote from my book?
Yeah. Obviously, you wrote your book in 2011.
Yeah.
Just after the financial crisis, and you said, the economy's evolution has gone awry. We need to build up the tradable sector, which almost certainly means building up our manufacturing capacity again.
So the link between manufacturing and tradable is quite strong. Now, manufacturing is not uniquely tradable. You can trade the minerals that you get out of the ground, that's your North Sea oil story, and you can trade services. But I do think manufacturing does seem to have a much bigger core in developing economies trade. And I think you need manufacturing for trade. So that's number one. But there's a second, I think it goes a bit further than that. One of the things we congratulated ourselves on, and I congratulated ourselves on, was our move up market. So we wanted to be much cleverer in thinking about where the value in something is. Okay, this is a good example. This is in the book, isn't it? It's on the back of the iPhone. I think it says made in China, designed in California, or so. I can't remember the exact phrase.
Apple certainly had that phrase for a while, designed in California, made in China.
And then when you looked at the kind of how much of the value was in China and how much was in California, it was ridiculous. It's sort of $10 China, $250 of the retail prices, as it was back in 2011, was in the United States. So we were trying to congratulate ourselves. We'll do the smart stuff. We're the clever clogs, and they can do all the kind of the routine stuff that we don't want to do because we're better than them. So they're going to do the factory. We'll do the design. Well, the truth is, if you let the manufacturing disappear, you soon discover that they're going to do the design as well. And then you kind of like, well, we better put the factories back. But it's actually better not to let them go. I mean, better to keep some than to lose the capacity to manufacture at all. And then the other thing is that in the end, I can't cite you any literature on this. I can't give you studies proving this or anything. But
listeners will help us out.
I think if you're not making it, you become detached from much of the process where the innovation is occurring. So to be a good designer, you need to have the manufacturing capability nearby, and I think you need to have some manufacturing in your economy to have skin in the game in which you understand.
So you wrote that 13 years ago. Now, obviously, there's, I don't want to play the blame game. There's no value in having the blame game. But who's to blame? Why haven't we actually? Haven't we paid heed to your words?
So it's very interesting because I actually genuinely thought what was going to happen was manufacturing would come back quite a bit. And I thought the way this was going to happen was that essentially the pound was going to come down a bit more and it would make the UK more attractive as a place to manufacture. So I was thinking, as North Sea oil perhaps dwindles away, the pound's a bit overvalued, it's been kept too high by the financial sector, just sucking in currency for us to borrow. So I was thinking this will all stop, the pound will fall, we'll get a very big manufacturing resurgence. So it just didn't happen. It just didn't happen. Maybe it still will.
I was just about to say. That's my next question.
Because there's another thing.
Do you still believe?
Right. I'll tell you. Look, I'll give you three reasons actually why I thought manufacturing would come home. One is China's getting much richer, so the reason to go over there becomes much smaller. Secondly, is I thought the pound would fall because it had been sort of propped up by some of the financial situation we'd had pre-crash, and then thirdly, I thought as North Sea oil diminishes, as an economy, through market price signals, we'll be struggling to make up for the exports that we're losing by gas and oil.
I'm going to pick you up on that first point, actually, because a couple of people we've spoken to on this show have alluded to a perception problem these days, which is that companies will instantly assume it's much more competitive from a price point of view to have something made in Asia than it is to have it in Europe or specifically within Britain. And a number of them were arguing, well, actually, our prices have come down and actually we're in the same ballpark now.
Well, I can believe that. I mean, I think a lot of companies decided to move from China for some of the lower value added stuff from Vietnam and bring it, say, to Turkey or somewhere like that. So that was quite a big part of a story as China got richer. Some have, I think, done the maths and they just say, look, it's really not that great. It's not that great to send it out thousands of miles away, and you lose control, and it takes longer to get things done. So no, I mean, I absolutely think I could believe that. I tell you what I do think China and some other Asian economies have is they have a very established infrastructure for contract manufacturing, for outsourcing the manufacturing, supply chain management. And I sort of see this from Dragon's Den, actually. I even noticed it from the early recordings of Dragon's Den in 2004 through to the later ones. People were going offshore to get things made. And it was a really good channel to do that. You would say, I'm going to make this rubber dinghy thing, let's say. Mine's better than anyone else's. I've got a fancy design. How do I do it? There were routes to just go to a sourcing agent in China who would then tell you and find the place for you to do it and sort of manage it for you. And I think that became incredibly routine. And we didn't have quite as thick a market in some of that. And the entrepreneur who wants to create a new rubber dinghy product line, wants to create that, really doesn't want to raise £2 million of capital to build a factory, to risk on the brimming rubber dinghy that may not work or may work in the marketplace. So much better to go to China. So I think China has sort of retained a power based on, if you like, the established links, supply chain links that just mean it's a... But obviously COVID has put a lot of damage in a lot of those. So we might well get, because you just couldn't travel to China and it became, the politics have become much less attractive. And so it may well be that's all changing. But there was certainly a lot of time when it was just the easiest thing to do, remarkably, was to go
I want
over
to
there.
pick up on that just when this car has gone by with a dodgy fan belt. Sorry, I realise our conversation is really going on and I'm taking up lots of your time, and this concrete block we're sat on is not getting any comfier. But when I came down to beg for you to provide me with some economic rigour to my idea that a strong domestic manufacturing is important, in a real ham-fisted journalistic way, I wrote down 4 things.
Okay.
And I phrased them all as opportunities, as
Right.
is commercially the nice way. And so the arguments I put forward were job opportunities, a spectrum of employment opportunities is important for society, geographical opportunities, the spread across the UK, sustainability opportunities, the idea that actually lots of products produced at a higher value perhaps have greater longevity. And then the other one, finally, is supply chain opportunities, the idea of building resilience within supply chains, which picks up on the point you just made about China.
That one I think totally agree with, 100%. The most interesting is your sustainability, because manufactured products are raw material intensive. Obviously, they use metal, plastic, they use stuff. Whereas if I give you a back massage, that's much less resource intensive. So moving an economy from physical consumption to experience consumption can be a sustainable move. And you will hear it said by Greens, we're all accumulating far too much junk. I go somewhere and buy a stupid souvenir to bring back and it sits on some shit. It's just, stop it. We don't need all this manufactured.
Certain charm to a snow globe.
Yeah. I think it goes both ways, the sustainability argument. I will say this. I think when it comes to consumption of physical goods, I'm very much in favour of, in fact, this is my philosophy when it comes to food. I'm in favour of think about the quality, not the quantity. So rather than producing tons of fast fashion, produce some nicer clothes that are meant to last longer and imbue more meaning to the wearer. And I see that all over the place, manufacturing becoming more intense experiences. It's not just big generic boxes of stuff.
Isn't that just about doing less on autopilot?
Yeah, exactly.
In consumption, full stop, whether that's eating a lot of food or buying a load of clothes.
Exactly.
Hi, if you're enjoying the show and want to support our makers and manufacturers, please hit the subscribe or follow button. If you're listening on Apple, hit the stars and rate the show. It takes a small moment but makes a big difference. Thanks. Right, back to the chat.
Okay, so of your 4 arguments, actually jobs, sustainability, I wouldn't go big on those. I mean, important issues as they are. I do, however, think geography is a very, very interesting one, because when it comes to tradable international services, lucrative tradable international services, putting aside universities, higher education, which is a very useful one actually, putting aside that, there's a tendency for services like law services and banking and for artistic creativity, for places like Hollywood, there is a tendency for them to cluster and to cram into the smallest area possible. It's something to do with, I don't know what it is, something to do with the sort of feeling that there's a vibe, and if you're a film producer, you want to be near where the other film producer is, or if you're a banker, you need to know what the kind of talk on the street is. So you have to be clustered. So things like international banking will tend to cluster, mostly in London, maybe in other big cities, but they're not going to go to Market Harborough, probably not going to Sunderland. You know, it's just the way those industries work. And so you are left with, if you overdo the tendency to invest in those industries, you are left with geographical imbalances. And that has been part of the story of the UK. We are geographically an economically imbalanced country. And that means even if London is very successful, even if London was able to pay for the whole country, that's not how you want to run a country. So that, I think, is a really important, very important reason for thinking about, I suppose, what they'd call the levelling up agenda, or the role of manufacturing in that. And if you've let manufacturing go and there's no culture of it and there's no status in it, it's much harder to have those areas that are not going to get the internationally tradable services doing anything tradable.
Final question. So, you know, and I don't want us to go all politics here, but obviously, kind of significant changes are taking place around the world at the moment in terms of politics. Seen some very interesting elections already in the first half of this year, and obviously other interesting elections to take place in the second half of the year. With that in mind, and thinking back to your belief and your quote from 13 years ago, where you were optimistic that manufacturing was going to come back to this country, are you more or less of the same opinion that manufacturing is going to come back to the UK?
Well, broadly speaking, Stephen, I have less faith in my forecast than I used to have. Broadly speaking, quite what form it'll come back in, I don't know. I do actually think manufacturing is going to come back, and that's because the world is becoming a rather different place. So for one thing, China's less attractive as a competitor in manufacturing. Secondly, the politics. Global politics has changed, and the idea of these extended supply chains across 30 different jurisdictions, it just all feels much less resilient than it used to. So resilience and actually COVID did part of this as well as the geopolitics. Resilience in supply chains is the new efficiency. This is what an economist called Dennis Snower said to me. Resilience is the new efficiency. It doesn't matter if it's 5% more, if it's actually there when you want it. So there's that, which means bringing it closer to home, if not at home. The second thing is there has been a big change in the intellectual political climate. So if you look at the Republican candidates in the US now, one Donald Trump, compare him to the Republicans' superstar president of the 1980s, Ronald Reagan. The economic philosophy is completely different. Reagan was very much of the globalized era, free trade, let competition bloom. Trump is not that kind of leader at all. His values are much more protectionist. His instincts are much more about stopping other people taking jobs away. And if he does it, the Europeans will feel to some extent compelled to do it. And there's just been a change in the world. You know, my career as an economics journalist was in the 90s. We were talking about the Uruguay round of trade negotiations, this extraordinary thing, a big trade agreement. God, it went on for years. Then that paved the way into the World Trade Organization, which became a kind of governing body for world trade. And it was all designed to facilitate these massively long, complex supply chains. And you just don't really hear very much of it now. It's not the vibe anymore. So I just think we are going to be in for an era where there's going to be a little bit less emphasis on extending the long arm of the supply chain to wherever the fastest buck is, and I think there'll be a lot of bringing it back on shore to richer economies, and you know, I think that politics is ultimately what might drive quite a lot of it back.
You heard it here first.
But that's not a prediction. That's just a thing a sort of journalist says, you know, because they don't have to take any responsibility for any of these things, or no one seems to stop talking to them if they get it wrong, as you have been proving with me today.
when it's proven right, we'll wheel out this again. Evan, as always, a huge pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's good.
Time to head home through Vauxhall's Pleasure Gardens. My thanks enormously to Evan for sitting down and chatting to us. Thanks to you for hanging out with us. We are just walking past the Black Dog pub, actually, for all you Taylor Swift fans out there, which includes me. I'm heading home. Got lots of recording and editing to do as we work on the next series, numbers 21 to 30 on our list of the greatest products we make in Britain. It's well underway. Kicks off again October the 15th. I do hope you'll join us. Until then, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I hope you're happy. I'll see you October the 15th. Bye.